absolutely talking over your butt. You have no clue why it pisses me off so much that you think symmetry is a thing to focus on, when instead you should really focus on the thing that drives it, which is energy, frequency, and vibrations.
He said, and I quote, "Einstein's relativity work is a magnificent mathematical garb which fascinates, dazzles, and makes people blind to the underlying errors. He was..."
So, in order to understand that, you have to understand the errors that is referred to.
Was wildly incorrect. Here's two of the many remarkable predictions of relativity made directly by Einstein that have since been verified.
But is that something that he said that... Okay, is that something that Tesla said you wouldn't find? Or isn't there?
First, gravitational lensing. Light bends...
Pretty much anything with an atmosphere of any sort can do some gravitational lensing. So, if you have a basic atmosphere, if you have energy around you, if you have stuff around you, you can absolutely pull stuff to end up bending and changing where it's going to look like it is. And that's kind of obvious. That's just refraction. We get that. So what?
Around massive objects in exactly the way predicted by Einstein. Second, gravitational waves. In 1915, Einstein predicted the existence of gravitational waves, and they were first detected in 2015 in exact agreement with Einstein's relativity. Tesla also said, and I quote, "The idea of atomic energy is illusionary. I have preached against it for 25 years, but there are still some who believe it to be realizable."
Okay, look. I'm gonna put you on blast here, because it's hard to imagine being able to overcome the forces that were binding things at the time, unless you have, like, the experiments that then ended up being, yeah, the first bomb was after his being alive.
Funny, because 2 years after his death, the atom bomb was dropped, which was an explosive demonstration that Tesla was incorrect. Also by...
We're getting into some odd topics here. So, the other thing is, recently I have heard... over the years, I have heard about the idea that quarks can be separated into individuals. And those individuals, once separated, will then spontaneously generate a new individual to be their copy, to be their partner, and go along with them. So, if you shoot off one quark from a pair of quarks that you already have, you have just generated two quarks out of essentially nothing. Where is that quark stuff coming from? We know that now. But in order to do this, we assumed that it was going to take more energy than we can ever accomplish. Now we're just doing that at mass, making antimatter. So the fathomability of achieving things on scales that we didn't think were possible a decade ago is that you should always think that it can be possible.
By the way, he was a raging eugenicist. Here's another quote. "No one who is not a desirable parent should be permitted to produce progeny." Now, let's...
Desirable parent is a curious thing, because, yeah, that leads to trying to manipulate genetics on a level that is going to be harmful, because genetics alone doesn't speak to what your lineage is going to do. A lot of people in my family tree, according to my parents, if they were drunk, they have negative emotional and whatever reactions. And that's not something I've ever experienced in any amount of time that I've ever had alcohol. So it's not a genetic thing purely, and perhaps it could be the mixture of the two, plus obviously it's part of psychology. And psychology is a hard thing to grab a hold of, and it's hard to believe that, yeah, people who have relatives in, like, the father or the grandfather or whatever else, if they were having problems with alcohol and emotional outbursts, then I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm living proof that it's absolutely not a genetic thing. And it's much more likely that it's a psychology thing. So, yeah, I would say that there's a lot of things that, based on, like, the person, you shouldn't weed out their ability to make an offspring who could become so much different than the person that they were. You're a combination of your mother and father, but you're also yourself developing. And you don't need to worry about your family tree and all this other stuff, about concerns about so many things, except for when it comes to, I don't know, hereditary things of diseases, in which case, maybe that is something that you could get a hold of and assess what is it in you, and then maybe fix yourself. But it doesn't mean that you can't have a kid who won't end up being okay. It's more likely that they might take on the negative traits of, like, being more risk of kidney failure or some heart failure or something. But that is not a complete and total thing. And it's hard to understand that with very little experience with genetics. Like, it's just a whole lot of up in the air, hard to understand at that point in time. We know a lot more now. So it's like, it was a weird time, and there's also bullshit about freaking whatever else. So I would say that's more of a sign of the times instead of a sign of how good or bad his mind is. But the stuff about energy, frequency, and symmetry, or frequency and vibration, you cannot just say symmetry is going to be the thing that works. You can look for symmetry, you can hope for symmetry, but again, you're going to have things that sometimes are going to develop in ways that are not symmetric, like flower petals. Absolutely, every time that you end up with a flower, you end up with a certain frequency. The rate of the petals are going to be in a certain number, and that number is designed specifically to make the most randomness, to take up the most space, and to end up giving you the most fuel for your flower. So you're using the most area of space without using as much material. And it's so much better having that and knowing that, because if you try to think of symmetry and then you talk about flowers, well, you're going to get lost. That doesn't work. But frequency and vibration, well, frequency directly influences flowers. There's a lot of other things. But I can't help but be bothered about this.
Might be called unfair, Tesla was potentially the greatest electrical engineer who ever lived. His contributions to modern society should be recognized. However, his knowledge of fundamental physics was severely limited by his lack of understanding of advanced mathematics, and he held reprehensible views on people he viewed as lesser.
Look, I don't give a shit about advanced mathematics. I don't need it. A lot of people who look into physics don't need mathematics in order to hold everything together. A lot of mathematics, a lot of the world in physics isn't about math. It's about there are all sorts of different patterns that end up showing up. And someone who has an affinity for understanding patterns are more likely to get a hold of all the different ideas that you can when it comes to how the world can work. For example, it can explain genetics a lot better than the idea of symmetry. Symmetry has nothing to do with genetics. The fact that there is a fish out there, that crazy fish that was said to be, like, it's said to be like the most useless or dumb fish, but it's like the most genius fish. One, it's a bioecosystem that can support other life than just itself, and it lets other people, like, there's all sorts of animals out there that have parasites that, like, birds will just pick those off, or cleaner fish will just pick those off. And you'll be a cleaner fish, you'll go inside someone's mouth, you'll clean their mouth, they won't hurt you, and you're fine. This is a crazy relationship, and it just happens out in nature all the time. So that fish is not that weird for having that. What's weird about that fish is that the two eyes on either side of its head end up on the other side of its head, asymmetrical. That is something that is like transforming from like one thing into a butterfly or whatever, or a moth, or frog, or whatever thing that you do with all these other things. You transform from a small thing which has the majority of its life doing one thing, and then you have this other thing that is like doing a completely different thing than what you've been doing for the rest of your life. That's very
really sound like someone.
That's very an asymmetrical type of life to exist in, and yet that is the rule, not symmetry. Although you might think it's symmetrical to have certain numbers that are flowing in a direction that seem to make the most amount of thing, but it's not the same as like equally symmetric or whatever else. There's all sorts of things to think about with this type of stuff. And also, for some reason, and I don't know why, pretty much every time I hear someone talk about electrons, they're always wrong. Now that's one of those claims that the moment someone says everyone is wrong about a specific thing, it's something that doesn't go well, because clearly they can't all be wrong. So many people have worked on it for decades, half a century or more even. How could they all be wrong? And the answer is, it's hard to get new information without doing those experiments, and even after doing those experiments, people forget about the electromagnetic field in their explanations, which makes them absolutely wrong. And they forget to test how the magnetic field works around things before they do these double slit experiments in the more recent years, or other stuff. Like, you assume that if you make a particle accelerator that's bigger than the Large Hadron Collider was, that you're going to get something smaller and smaller and smaller. Focusing some lasers to a point and make a black hole, why don't you? Because that is the kind of technology you're going to want to end up doing. Don't do it anywhere near any other substances, and hopefully you can make something that you can dissipate before it becomes too big and swallows the planet. It'd be great if you could accomplish making black holes that can be stabilized and learn how to dissipate them. Until we get into that regime, which is so incredibly dangerous, you just never want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. but we accelerated particles, and they said you might end up making a black hole in the Large Hadron Collider. It never happened. If you made a black hole in the Large Hadron Collider that was microscopic or nanoscopic or femtoscopic, it was the shortest lived little blip ever. And no one cares. Because it didn't. We're still here. We're fine. Never have I heard that they have ever made a tiniest black hole just by making an particle hit each other. There are so many things that we're trying to learn and we're developing and becoming better at learning. So, going from one thing to another gives us great progression. Leading back to the idea of vibrations and what I said about you can manipulate the entire fabric of reality with vibrations. You realize that you can hold things in place using standing waves. And the smaller the type of standing waves you need, and people have said you're going to need a ton of energy to do stuff with quarks. We did it. We said that it was going to take a ton of energy to do something with atomic particles because they clearly are so stable. There's no way you're going to make a bomb. And then we made a bomb. And then we learned better and better ways of doing such a thing. There are so many other things that we have said it takes this X amount of energy, and we are learning how to visualize electrons recently because of a scanner that is now using X-rays, and guess what? I predicted it. Quadrillion frames per second type accuracy. We are no longer in the realm of the amount of energy is something that will be always impossible. We are in the realm of it will be eventually the norm to talk about all these things and have all these things happen in our lifetime, not in like the next 100 years. And if anyone would ever just use sound and the original genius work of cold fusion, okay, you take the electrons out of it, you put it in between a couple plates, you use sound to control the neutrons, electromagnetism to control the protons, and suddenly you have the ability to remake matter in any amount that you want, any size that you want. Reinitialize the electrons into the mix, and then you end up with an atom that is the size and the function that you wanted it to be. It doesn't matter what it originally was because we remix matter all the time, but this is a way of doing it without using a lot of energy, without just don't even think about making energy with this. You're going to spend energy to do this, but not nearly as much as inertial confinement and stupid amounts of heat. This is not important. You're just remaking matter. You're just reshuffling some things. It's chemistry on a nuclear level. It works. And I get real annoyed anytime I hear certain things. I do not at all agree with symmetry. I even made a comment stating about the eugenics part, like deal with the stuff that causes cancers. The thing is, the cancers thing is like, we need to have the same kind of, recently we heard research into baldness and how that process works is going to make leaps and bounds, possibly, towards fighting cancers. Because the main problem with cancer is that it has an on and off switch for those cells. It's supposed to kill itself if it becomes deformed. And if it doesn't do that, it becomes cancerous. Well, if you know that process, and we're starting to, we can just eliminate cancers by reintroducing the on and off switch stuff. That is a completely different video. And I really should respond to that video because that's way more interesting and cool. And also, where the hell is it? I don't even know. There's something about baldness. I don't think it's Klingon. No, that's music related. There's this things. No. No. Hi, Henya. It's definitely a short, which is so cool. I don't remember what it was. Where it was. Was it a video? Or was it a... Oh no, it is baldness. It is a baldness video. SciShow, yeah. And cancer might have a thing in common. I'll just shove that into the description. You watch that for yourself and enjoy. Because that is way cool. Like, think about the idea of, oh, well, some people have baldness or whatever. No, I'm not trying to do the playlist. I'm trying to do the description. Blah, blah, blah. Baldness Cancer Connection. So freaking awesome. Go watch that. I'll see you later.